Quickies, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of several books, no other than Mr. Robert Boog.
Thanks, Daniel.
Hello, Mr. Robert, and thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, and last week we talked about your latest, let's say, non-fiction book, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So can we do the recap?
Sure. That book was called North by Shakespeare, or Where North by Shakespeare Goes South, actually. So that book talks about the latest theory proposed in 2021 is that William Shakespeare bought the plays from Thomas North. And what the researchers did was they took Shakespeare's plays and they ran it through a computer software that normally checks for plagiarism among college students. And they discovered that there were hundreds of lines that matched the works of Thomas North, who was the author of Plutarch's Lives. So my book, Where North by Shakespeare Goes South, kind of explains why they matched. That Thomas North was the like a pen name for a man by the name of Edward de Vere. He was a ghostwriter for Thomas North. He actually did the writing, and so I kind of went through and proved it by um, various techniques, and that you kind of have to read in the book.
Yes, people, let's support the latest non-fiction book of Mr. Robert Boog. You know what, Mr. Robert? Last week I have four interviews on my book 101 review, and the highest downloads is our episode. Ah, interesting. They
Yeah.
love, they love the Where North by Shakespeare Goes South. Oh, that's be awesome. So let's support Mr. Robert Book if you want to know really who is the real Shakespeare. So, Mr. Robert, what we gonna talk about today?
Well, my book called Shakey's Madness has a subtitle that says, Does a Mental Disorder Reveal the Real William Shakespeare? And I wrote this during the pandemic. And what happened was I was watching TV during the pandemic and I noticed this commercial that was airing about every 15 minutes. It was for Latuda. And I was wondering, what is this product, or why would people watching daytime TV, you know, be buying this, whatever it was? So I took my iPhone and I Google searched it. And Latuda is a drug for bipolar disorder. So it helps minimize the symptoms of bipolar disorder, which are like extreme highs and extreme lows. So
Oh,
yeah, so later that same day, I was on Twitter. I was kind of doom scrolling on Twitter, and I came across Sir Patrick Stewart, and he was reading a Shakespeare sonnet per day. And it just so happened that the one he read was full of doom and gloom and despair. And I thought to myself, or I kind of joked aloud, I said, it sounds like old Shakey needed some Latuda. And then I realized, wait, what if that's true? What if William Shakespeare, or the author of Shakespeare, really had bipolar disorder? And back then, there was no modern medicine for it. And what they would do, basically, they believe that a person with bipolar disorder, or they back then they would call it epilepsy. So
mm,
so I wondered, okay, I wonder if there's any epilepsy or signs of fainting in Shakespeare. And I started to, I was remembering a couple of the plays, and I I thought to myself, I think there's about 5 or 6, but then I realized I should just Google this and see if somebody has actually, made a study of this. And it turns out that in 2006, a British physician named Dr. Ken Heaton went through every single poem, sonnet, play written by William Shakespeare, and he came up with a total of like 31 instances of fainting in Shakespeare. I mean, it's kind of wild. It's fainting and near fainting. So with that in mind, then I went through like some of the sonnets, because in the sonnets would be something where a person would explain their personal feelings, and I noticed that there were a lot of this or a lot of talk about depression and feeling down, and in Shakespeare's time they would call it melancholy, and there are several plays that involve melancholy. And when you look at the life of Edward de Vere, who I believe was the writer, he showed overt symptoms of having bipolar disorder. One of the symptoms, for example, is excessive spending of money. So we know Shakespeare bought he bought a big house, he bought farmland, he bought shares in a theater. He was smart with his money. Edward de Vere inherited like $70 million when he turned 21. And 10 years later, guess how much money he had?
Uh,
Zero. He blew through $70 million in like 10 years. It's crazy.
oh,
So, but that is one of the symptoms of bipolar disorder. So is being depressed. So it's high, extreme highs, extreme lows. And I mean, there's several symptoms, but if you look at it, he pretty much fits the bill for having bipolar disorder. Now in Shakespeare, we know that, like, for example, Hamlet, he says, is to be or not to be, right? That is the
yes.
question. He's talking about to live or not to live, right? To be or not to be. So he's talking about, should I end my life or not? And that's when you realize that there is all this talk in the Shakespeare uh, canon that, but it's, I mean, it's kind of like William Shakespeare, or the writer of the real author, let's say Edward de Vere, is not the only one with bipolar disorder. If you look back in the past, for example, if I were to name some names like Britney Spears or Winston Churchill, Mariah Carey, Mel Gibson, Demi Lovato, Russell Brand, Jimi Hendrix, Ernest Hemingway, Frank Sinatra. Like, there are a lot of famous people, even in the past, Pythagoras, um, you know, Alexander the Great, I mean, Julius Caesar, there's all kinds of them. And interestingly, when you look at the plays that are written, Anthony and Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, these are people that had bipolar disorder or epilepsy, sorry.
Oh my goodness. Sounds interesting, Mr. Robert. But congratulations, because according to Amazon, Shakey's Madness is on number 48 in Renaissance Literary Criticism, 156 in Shakespearean Literary Criticism, and a, a big achievement for that.
Oh, thank you.
Definitely a big achievement. So Shakey's Madness, how
Yeah,
did you crafted it?
well, um, a lot of it goes with kind of like, I'm a big fan of the Detective Monk. So I kind of like lead readers um, on an adventure with Monk, Detective Monk, and just to like imagine if Monk were looking at things, what he might say, and things like that. And I added some personal stories. For example, I went to school at UCLA, and to get an A in a class there is very difficult. And I had a Shakespeare class where the instructor, her favorite sonnet was Sonnet 116. And if you've never heard of this sonnet before, or you don't know that number, it goes like, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments." I had the dumb idea of rewriting it. I just,
Wow.
yeah, I just broke up with my girlfriend, and my instructor said, this is the best poem in the world about love, and I disagreed. And so I wrote this paper where I rewrote, like, I don't know, 3 or maybe 4 lines from Shakespeare's sonnet. And when I got my paper back, there was no grade on it. It just said, "Please, Robert, please see me after class." In my
Again.
So I was doomed. I was and I went there pretty, feeling pretty nervous. And she sat down and kind of like suggested that I keep, I should keep writing and doing stuff, because she had never really thought about it before. And I guess she ended up like liking my my little changes. But if you'd like to, I have it here if you want to. The original goes like this: "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out, even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved." Okay, so that's Shakespeare's. So here is mine. All right. "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love involves trust, like how I trust you, but trust is hard to gain and easy to lose. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out to the edge of doom. Love means caring for someone, no matter what, for love may be blind, but never is trust." So that was,
Oh, lovely.
so what I noticed in Shakespeare's sonnet, she said it was the greatest love poem, but I had just broken up with this girl who had cheated on me. And I thought, you have to have trust in a relationship, and it was missing in that great poem. So I that was my version, that I had to put it in. And she said, I never really noticed or thought about that. So it was kind of like uh, something that I don't know, she liked, I guess.
Yes, it's a lovely version, a modification, because you were, I think, because of the emotion that you had that time. Don't you
Or the
think?
or yeah, or the wine I was drinking that night.
I don't think so. You're a good writer, as you said when the first episode that the principal called you, and then, oh, there's something in your writing that the people need to read. So, Shakey's Madness. What behind the title of this book?
Okay, so the reason I made it Shaky and not Shakespeare is I wanted it to apply to a or to appeal to a younger audience, more like college aged or a little bit above, because they are often like more open minded. Some of the people like my age, they are closed minded because they've learned that they learned something in school, that William Shakespeare was this writer and you've got to believe in it. So it's kind of like they don't want to open their minds, even though the evidence is there. I mean, it's crazy. There's no real evidence that William Shakespeare wrote anything. It's crazy. And we've seen that his name is on a book. But in 1963, there was a book that came out, and it was by the author Victoria Lucas. Sorry, and it became a really famous book. And 19 years later, she won the Nobel Prize um, for poetry. So this is in 1982. Yet she died in 1963. So the question is, how could she win the Nobel Prize? I mean, she couldn't have been writing any more plays, correct? I mean,
Yes, yes.
and actually, Victoria Lucas was a pen name. Her real name was Sylvia Plath. And most people have heard of Sylvia Plath and the Bell Jar. That's the her book of poems that is really famous. And what her husband did is he just collected her old poems and re you know republished them in 1982, and it won the Nobel Prize. So when it comes to Edward de Vere died in 1604. And so Shakespeare experts will always try to say, well, there are at least like, 5 to 10 plays that were written after 1604. So Edward de Vere cannot be the real author. But just like Victoria Lucas, I mean, it seems like someone, I mean, that Edward de Vere could have written these plays, and his stepmother, her name was Mildred Cecil. Mildred Cecil's sister was the mother of Sir Francis Bacon, which means that if Edward de Vere's daughters had asked their uncle Sir Francis Bacon, hey, could you polish up these plays because we want to publish them in the first folio in 1623, 19 years after our father's death, could you do that for us? I mean, it seems likely or logical to me at least. And yet so many people like my age say, oh, no, that would never happen. That's impossible. The other thing was the book, the first folio, which contains the 36 plays of William Shakespeare, was dedicated to two brothers, Philip Herbert and William Herbert, and they were both related to Edward de Vere's daughters. So Susan Vere was married to Philip Herbert. So you know what they say: happy life,
Happy
happy
life.
wife. Yeah.
Happy life. Happy wife, happy life, people.
Yes.
So, Where Not by Shakespeare Goes South is the continuation. So, the Shakey's Madness is, let's say, the prequel or the sequel.
It is actually a prequel because the book North by Shakespeare came out in 2021, and I had to like write it after it came out. So that came out in 2022. The Shakey's Madness I wrote in like 2020.
Oh, okay. So, Shakey's Madness, what do you think the best highlight?
Um, that's of course my poem. Of course, I've got to cheer that on a little bit, but mainly just it's the idea that if you believe that there are famous people, famous writers that all have endured bipolar disorder, like Hemingway and others, um, is there a link between Shakespeare and bipolar disorder? If that's true, it's not like you can, you know, I don't know. It's not like a college degree where you get it and you can burn it later or something. But bipolar disorder is something that you live with your entire life. I mean, you can't get rid of it or something. So it's not like he could just fake it for a little while. And if you believe that is true, then you'll want to read my book. I actually sent it to a psychiatrist and asked him to give me his professional. This was before I published it, and he is a big or a noted Shakespeare from Stratford upon Avon believer. So when he read my book, he said, "I think you've got something here because nobody's ever suggested that in this and in history." So yeah, he was really complimentary about it. So yeah, if I mean, it's kind of like a new idea, but it's almost like a DNA. If someone has bipolar disorder in the United States, like uh, 0.03% of the population might have bipolar disorder, for example. So I don't know. So maybe 6 million people or something like that have it. And of those, the ones that might have had epilepsy as a child, um, only 20%. So all of a sudden it becomes much more narrow and just it's not as commonplace. So I think that if you really look closely at the two men, this Edward de Vere and William Shakespeare, you will see what I'm seeing, that it's most likely this guy. But he needed someone like Shakespeare to be his front, I think, because he. What is interesting about bipolar disorder is that a lot of people with it are afraid and suffer from self confidence, or lack of self confidence. So he kind of needed someone to be the front man.
Yes, very well said, Mr. Robert. But before we go on, of course, I want to shout out to the people listening in the United Kingdom because we're talking about Shakespeare. In England, I got 84%, in Scotland at 10%, Wales at 5%, in Northern Ireland at 2%. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, just like Mr. Robert Boog. So, Mr. Robert Shakey's madness, what do you think the flaws?
Um, Flaws. Well, of course, anybody can tear things apart. Um, I've had people that with bipolar disorder telling me that how can you diagnose someone who passed away over 400 years ago? Are you crazy? Uh, that is one of the complaints. However, what I did too, I before I published it, I took the symptoms. You can go online. You can go to like latuda.com and enter, kind of like answer a questionnaire, and then you'll get an email back saying what is the likelihood that you have bipolar disorder. So I did that with Edward de Vere. I pretended like I was him and I put in his name and I answered the questionnaire, and it came back that out of a score of 0 to 10, it was an 8.5 that he had bipolar disorder. That with the psychiatrist who said that I was onto something, I felt pretty strongly about it. But people will always argue that how can you make this diagnosis when he's been dead for over 400 years?
Yes. And at the time, probably in 17th century, they don't know yet that is bipolar.
It,
Something
it
else.
well, the term bipolar disorder didn't come out until like 1980. So before that, it was just schizophrenic or manic depression. Manic depression. And it's actually the 16th century. So we're talking about the 1500s here.
Oh, 1500.
Yeah.
Imagine.
So what they would do, if you had or were considered mad, they believed that you were possessed by the devil. So they would take a stick, beat you with it, and put you into a dark room. And Shakespeare talks about this in 3 of his plays. And I mean, it's crazy that there are these references to the cure for what was considered epilepsy in Shakespeare's plays. Somebody had to know about, or had to have seen people fainting or fainted themselves. That's the epilepsy for the author himself. And then, because it's not only just in the plays, people say, well, maybe he wrote about fainting because it was a dramatic thing. They're up on stage, there was a lot of blood, maybe it was hot out, they were dehydrated. They said, yeah, and maybe someone was pregnant too, right? I mean, people people faint for that. But you see it in his poems too. Like this guy runs a long distance and then it says Tarkin faints, and you're wondering, and this other guy swoons, and you're wondering why would they do that? I mean, it doesn't really add up, unless the person who was writing it felt this is how I would react if that was me. I mean, if I ran a long distance, I would faint.
Yes. So shake is madness. What are your preparation in writing this book?
um, my preparation for writing this book was the same as I write fast. So that means like I write 10 pages, then I write 40, that turns into 40 pages, 40 pages turns into 100 pages, 100 pages turns into 120 pages. I mean, I kind of do that fast. I wanted to get it like out. So I don't call myself a writer. I'm more of a rewriter. So I will go back in and rewrite. And that's the thing that doesn't make sense to me with Shakespeare, the traditional author, because we all know that great writing involves rewriting. You have to keep rewriting, keep like going back, reviewing, redoing. And if you don't do that, then your papers don't come out good, or your poems, or whatever you're writing. But when you look at the timeline for William Shakespeare, he had like 7 plays and 2 really long poems, all in the space of like 4 years. And that's not even counting the 6 or 7 sonnets he probably wrote or had to have written during that time period. So it's just a matter of, yeah, you could write that, but you would have to do all the rewriting. And when you add the rewriting to it, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, eh, I think most of us have a hard enough time, and we're using a laptop or like a word processor, and they didn't have that back then. So I think it's just kind of crazy to think somebody could do all this without. And the reason why Edward de Vere makes more sense then is because he was 15 years older than Shakespeare. So he had the time. I mean, he didn't have to write it all within 4 years. He could have written it out over 15 years. And now it's suddenly he's got lots of time to rewrite.
Yes, indeed. Are you a gardener or architect in terms of writing?
I would say more of a gardener.
Oh, that's why you're so fast, right?
I don't know about that.
You just fast, 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 just like me. If I do something, I want to finish fast. It's just like, oh, I want to do this poetry book in one day. Just like write, 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 and then voila, you're done.
But
Right?
you rewrite a lot with your poems, though, right?
Yes, I do.
So that's the confession that all writers have to face. Yeah, I have to spend time rewriting. If I don't, it's not going to be as good, and it's like a fact of life. But people don't want to face that fact with Shakespeare. They just think, oh, he was a genius, so he didn't have to do anything. The crazy thing about Shakespeare too is that in when you look at Edward de Vere's study schedule. Okay, so here's what happened. His Edward de Vere's father died when he was 12, and they sent him to live at this big house called Cecil House. And by law he had to go there. So he went there, and the master of the house had him. He had to play a musical instrument every day for half an hour to an hour. He had to study Latin, um, French, French every day for 2 hours, different things like that. So when you add up all the time he must have spent on all these things, because he lived there for 9 years. So if you were to play a musical instrument even if you hated it, after 9 years playing every day, eventually you would probably get good at it, right? I mean, because you're just, even if you're playing the same song.
Yes.
So, and that's what we find if you read closely in Shakespeare. There's a lot of musical notes, or he talks about, for example, in Romeo and Juliet, there's a character whose name is Simon. catling. And catling is actually the strings for a violin or a viola. So that's and the other character's name is James Soundgarden, and a Soundgarden is the strut in a viola. So he's playing with like punning names and musical allusions in the plays. And if you're not a musician, you would not notice that. You wouldn't. It would not occur to you. So that's when you look at these little things. When you look at Shakespeare closely, you realize, I don't think this they have the right person here. And I think it was that. That's why I think they should actually call it Shakespeare, Vere, because that was the last name of the real writer, I believe.
Indeed. So before we go on, Mr. Robert, I want to invite you to listen to my other podcast, Comedy 101 with Mr. Mike Lakis. Comedy 101, empowering all comedians all over the world. We're gonna teach you how to laugh and I'm gonna teach you how to entertain other people because Mr. Mike is one of the legendary in stand-up comedy. So please do listen. Comedy 101. Plus one more, please do grab a copy of my Food 101 Volume 1 Basics. It's all about my 100 episodes of my Food 101 podcast. And it's all the basics that you need in the kitchen to make your food delicious. So please do grab a copy. Food 101, Volume 1, Basics. Plus, if you want to take the Volume 2, Fundamentals, it's the continuation of what I'm talking about on the Volume 1. So, Mr. Robert, can you please invite our listeners to buy all your books?
Sure. Yeah, you can find them at my website, robertboog.com. So Robert, and then my last name is B like boy, OOG like George.com. And you can see what I think I've bundled a couple of them together so that people have told me, oh, I wish that you had a bundle because then that way it would be cheaper. And so I made it cheaper that way than if you were to buy them on Amazon.
Yes, definitely. So, Shakey's Madness, if you describe in five adjectives, what are they?
I would say if Shakespeare did not write the poems, plays, and sonnets, who did? Something like that. I don't know.
Yes, definitely. It's something else, right?
So when are we going to hear one of your poems, Daniel?
Oh, I did already my one of my podcast, abstract poetry. If you want to listen, you want to listen one of my uh volume one emotions. I talk about emotions like happiness, sadness. Yeah, so abstract poetry. It's on any platform available now on Apple, Spotify, or whatever you listen your podcasts. Abstract poetry, people. You can listen there, Mr. Robert.
Yeah, I find it difficult to write poems actually, but that's why I ended up writing a couple of songs. So you can find songs that I've written on YouTube. Actually, here's what happened. I get in the habit of carrying a yellow line pad, and then
Yes.
sometimes I'll just jot down thoughts and words that come to mind and stuff. And I was doing this as a practice. Like I would sit and just write down stuff for like 10 minutes or 12 minutes or something like that. If I couldn't think of anything to write, I would like rewrite something that I'd already written, right? Okay,
Yes.
so one day I was with this client and she said, "Aren't you going to write this down?" And I realized I'd left my pad at a Starbucks. So I went back to Starbucks. I asked the barista, "Hey, did anybody turn in a yellow line pad?" And she said, "Yeah, I have it right here." And she said, "I didn't realize you were a songwriter." I didn't realize that either. so, so she said, "You know what? I have a friend. I I think she would love this song." And it was not a song, but I let her, you know, do her thing to it, and it actually turned out pretty good. It's funny, um, so it's kind of weird the way the world works, or the universe works, I suppose. But yeah, so after that, I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe what I'm writing are songs, so maybe I should try to make it more like a song. And that's what I started doing. I kind of got out of the poetry thing, but it wasn't really, I wasn't really writing poems actually. I was just doodling, or you know what I mean, just
Yes. Yes.
jotting down words.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. We'll see, Daniel.
Bodycon people, see you soon.